The hallway was quiet, almost eerily so, the usual bustle of the office having dwindled into the soft echo of distant keyboards and the hum of the air conditioning. He walked with the casual rhythm of someone ready to end the day, briefcase in hand, coat loosely draped over one arm, thoughts already drifting toward the evening. The polished floor reflected the soft, warm glow of the overhead lights, and each step he took seemed louder than usual in the emptiness. Then she appeared. She stepped into his path with the kind of graceful confidence that could make a crowded room feel empty, yet in the dim hallway, she seemed almost luminous. She was 40 years old, her black hair falling in gentle waves over her shoulders, a faint trace of scent lingering, something soft, floral, yet subtle, like spring rain after a storm. Her outfit was impeccable, a tailored cream blouse tucked neatly into dark trousers, polished shoes that reflected the overhead light. She didn't just stand there, she commanded the space gently, the kind of presence that made him pause without a word. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world contracted. There was a quiet intensity in her gaze, observant, knowing, slightly curious, and a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It wasn't flirtation, exactly, but it carried a warmth that was unexpectedly personal. He felt a slight jolt, his chest tightening, not from fear but from the unexpected weight of attention. His hand tightened around the briefcase, the cool leather grounding him as his heartbeat quickened. She shifted subtly, the movement graceful and natural. One hand rested lightly on the folder she carried, the other brushing against her side as if to steady herself, a delicate hint of nervousness under her composed exterior. Her eyes didn't waver from his, and he noticed the small details. The way her sleeve caught the light, the faint curve of her lips, the softness around her eyes that suggested both experience and quiet vulnerability. Every element of her presence seemed intentional, yet effortless, leaving him simultaneously intrigued and cautious. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, her voice calm, warm, and measured. Each word seemed to linger in the air, resonating softly against the walls of the hallway. It wasn't just a greeting. It carried subtle weight, the promise of a conversation that might extend beyond pleasantries. He swallowed, words caught briefly in his throat, and gave a small nod, aware that this was no ordinary encounter. For a few moments neither of them moved. The hallway felt narrower, warmer, more intimate than it had any right to at this hour. The air seemed charged, not with tension alone but with curiosity, anticipation, and the quiet beginnings of something neither fully understood yet. A knock on the office door in the distance went unnoticed. All that mattered was the space between them and the subtle gravity of her presence. It was a simple, unplanned moment, one that could have passed unnoticed in another life, but it left an imprint. The night, once predictable, had suddenly become uncertain, carrying the faint but unmistakable thrill of a connection waiting to be explored. And in that soft glow of the hallway, he realized that leaving wouldn't be as simple as walking away. After the brief pause, she spoke again, her voice calm, smooth, yet carrying an unexpected warmth that made him want to listen more closely. "Heading out so soon?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, the movement subtle but deliberate. Her black hair caught the soft glow of the hallway lights, framing her face like a halo, and her dark eyes held an intensity that made it impossible to look away. At 40, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that blended effortlessly with an understated vulnerability, a combination that drew attention without demanding it. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the closeness between them. The briefcase in his hand felt heavier, more tangible, as though grounding him against the quiet pull of her presence. Words hovered on his lips, hesitant, unsure, while she smiled faintly, just enough to acknowledge him without overstepping. She adjusted the folder she held in her hand, brushing the edge lightly with her fingers, a gesture that seemed both practical and oddly intimate in its delicacy. Their conversation began with polite exchanges, small talk about the day, the quiet of the building, the lingering hum of the office lights. But beneath the surface, a subtle tension hummed like a string pulled taut. He noticed the little details. The way she leaned slightly forward when she spoke, the way her eyes lingered just a heartbeat too long, the way she subtly mirrored his posture without consciously trying. Every small motion felt magnified in the narrow hallway, turning casual gestures into moments of connection. She laughed softly at one of his comments, a sound warm and unexpected, like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. The laugh was fleeting, yet it carried a magnetic quality, drawing his gaze to her lips and then quickly back to her eyes. He caught himself unconsciously stepping slightly closer, careful not to cross the invisible line, yet aware that the distance between them felt charged, alive. Her smile widened just slightly, as though she had noticed, acknowledging the tension without addressing it. The hallway felt smaller, almost intimate, the warm overhead lights casting soft reflections on the polished floor. He could sense the faint scent of her perfume, light, floral, and understated, mixing with the cool air of the building. It was a sensory reminder of her presence, subtle but persistent, like a quiet invitation to notice, to engage, to linger. Their hands brushed briefly when he shifted his briefcase, a fleeting contact that sent an unanticipated jolt through him. Neither flinched, but the brush lingered in memory, a tactile punctuation in their conversation. The moment carried an unspoken acknowledgement, curiosity, admiration, and a faint spark of something that neither of them could fully articulate. As their conversation continued, every word, every glance, every slight movement felt intentional and significant. The tension was not pressing, but delicate, threaded through each gesture, each pause, each breath. And in that brief hallway encounter, he realized that this was no ordinary exchange. Something had shifted, something quietly thrilling had begun, and it was impossible to ignore. The hallway, once merely a passage between offices and exits, now felt like a small world of its own. The conversation had shifted from casual pleasantries to something more personal, more revealing. She, 40 years old, black hair cascading softly over her shoulders, dressed in a tailored cream blouse and dark trousers, leaned slightly against the wall, her posture relaxed yet precise, a subtle balance of confidence and ease. Her eyes, dark and reflective, carried a depth that spoke of experience, quiet struggles, and unexpected tenderness. "I never realized how quiet it gets here after hours," she admitted, voice soft, almost confessional. "It's peaceful, but it also makes you notice things you usually overlook." She shifted her weight, fingers brushing the edge of her folder, a small, intimate gesture that drew his attention more than he expected. He noticed the delicate curve of her neck, the faint warmth radiating from her presence, and the way her subtle movements conveyed both composure and a hint of vulnerability. He responded cautiously, genuinely intrigued. "I like the quiet," he said, adjusting his briefcase slightly in his hands. "It's different from the noise of the day, makes you feel aware of what's around you." His words were simple, but in the warm hallway glow, they felt heavier, more charged. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, and he realized she understood more than he was saying, reading between the lines, as though the hallway itself were a shared confidant. The conversation deepened. She spoke lightly of work challenges and brief anecdotes from her personal life, moments that revealed her humanity without forcing intimacy. He noticed the nuanced gestures, her fingers lightly drumming against the folder, the occasional tilt of her head when considering a word, and the way her eyes softened when she laughed quietly at a small joke he made. These movements were subtle, but in the confined hallway space, they became electric, sending a quiet thrill through him. He, too, began to share small details about himself, stories of work, fleeting moments from the week, personal reflections he normally kept private. She listened, genuinely attentive, eyes never leaving his face, lips parted slightly in quiet engagement. In return, he noticed her body language, how her shoulders relaxed slightly when he spoke, how her eyes glimmered with warmth when a shared understanding passed between them. The space felt intimate, like the rest of the building had vanished, leaving just the two of them in a private, unfolding moment. A faint smile flickered across her face as she looked at him. "It's rare," she said softly, "to find someone who notices these little things, who actually sees beyond what's obvious." Her words lingered in the air, suspended between them, carrying weight, invitation, and subtle longing. His chest tightened slightly, and he felt an unspoken thrill, the realization that this chance encounter was transforming into something quietly significant. The hallway seemed smaller, warmer, more charged. Every glance, every gesture, every slight movement carried meaning beyond the words spoken. And as he met her gaze again, he understood that what began as a brief, unexpected stop in the hallway had evolved into the slow, unfolding beginning of something remarkable: connection, curiosity, and attention that neither time nor distance could diminish. The hallway, once merely a transitional space, had transformed into a charged environment. Each movement, glance, and breath between them carried subtle significance. She, 40 years old, black hair falling gracefully around her shoulders, wearing a tailored cream blouse and dark trousers, shifted slightly, her hand brushing the edge of the folder she held. It was unintentional, yet it felt deliberate in the way it drew his attention. He noticed the warmth of her presence, the faint perfume lingering in the air, soft, floral, and comforting, yet somehow intoxicating. A pause settled between them, quiet but alive. The soft hum of the building's air conditioning and distant keyboard clacks seemed to fade, leaving just the rhythm of their own breathing. He realized his chest was tighter than usual, a subtle tension that wasn't discomfort but awareness, heightened, alert, aware of her nearness. She tilted her head slightly, eyes meeting his with an intensity that was both inviting and challenging. In that silent exchange, the hallway seemed to shrink, enclosing them in a private bubble of observation and unspoken curiosity. She shifted closer, not overtly, but enough for the subtle warmth of proximity to register. Their shoulders almost brushed, a whisper of contact that sent an unexpected shiver through him. His hands, still gripping his briefcase, twitched slightly, caught between the desire to maintain composure and the pull of the moment. Every glance she offered lingered a heartbeat too long, her dark eyes reflecting both amusement and a faint vulnerability. He noticed the curve of her lips as she smiled softly, the quiet tilt of her head as though weighing his every reaction. Words returned slowly, carefully. "You seem different in the quiet," she said softly, voice warm, inviting. He could feel the weight behind her words, not just casual observation, but something deeper, more personal. He replied, voice slightly hushed, aware of the intimate cadence of her tone. "It's easier to notice the little things." There was a charged silence following, filled with potential and restraint. Every tiny gesture, the shift of her hand on the folder, the subtle adjustment of her stance, the soft exhale that accompanied her words, added to the tension building between them. A brief, accidental brush of hands occurred when he adjusted the briefcase. The contact was fleeting, but electric, a spark that neither of them ignored. Her eyes softened immediately, a slight upward curve in her lips acknowledging the shared moment, yet neither spoke about it. The tension was not awkward, it was magnetic, the kind of silent pull that made the ordinary extraordinary. The hallway's warm overhead lights reflected off the polished floor, highlighting the intimate space they now occupied. Every movement felt deliberate, every glance meaningful, and every silence pregnant with potential. He realized with a quiet thrill that this chance encounter had transformed into something far more potent, something that neither distance nor decorum could diminish. The quiet tension settled like a delicate web, weaving connection, curiosity, and attraction into the smallest gestures. Each moment, each subtle touch, each lingering look was a step toward understanding, toward closeness, and toward the slow, inevitable pull of something beyond the ordinary. The night, he realized, had changed in an instant, and neither of them would leave the same as they entered. The hallway, once merely a passage, had begun to feel like a private world, intimate and alive with quiet connection. The conversation, though still light and casual on the surface, carried a subtle undercurrent of care and attention. She, 40 years old, black hair softly falling around her shoulders, dressed in a cream blouse and dark trousers, shifted her weight slightly, drawing her hand along the smooth edge of the folder she carried. The gesture seemed unremarkable, yet in the confined space it carried warmth, awareness, and an unspoken invitation. He noticed the way her eyes softened when she spoke, the slight curve of her lips that suggested both amusement and understanding. "You must be tired after the day," she remarked gently. Without waiting for a response, she adjusted her scarf, and he instinctively reached forward with the small blanket he always carried in the trunk of his car, offering it without thinking. The motion was subtle, almost casual, yet when it draped over her shoulders, her eyes met his, dark and thoughtful, and a faint, genuine smile appeared, soft, almost shy, and entirely luminous. The subtle warmth of the gesture lingered, not just physically but emotionally. He could feel a quiet connection forming in the space between them, in the brush of fabric against her skin, in the way her shoulders shifted slightly closer to him. The tactile sensation, combined with the gentle rhythm of their conversation, created a charged yet comforting energy. Even her laughter, quiet and melodic, seemed to reverberate softly against the polished floor, blending with the muted hum of the office behind them. As they continued to talk, small acts of attentiveness multiplied naturally. She handed him a document, and their fingers brushed lightly for a heartbeat that seemed impossibly long. He noticed how her hand lingered ever so slightly on his before retreating, a brief but meaningful acknowledgement of their shared space. When she laughed at a light joke, he could see the faint crinkle at the corner of her eyes, the way her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. These small gestures, imperceptible to anyone else, carried weight, pulling them closer emotionally even as their conversation remained polite and measured. Even the simplest movements were infused with meaning. When she reached for a cup of coffee on the side table, their hands touched again, this time more deliberately, and he felt a warmth that radiated through his chest, grounding him in the moment. He caught the soft fragrance of her perfume, a delicate floral note, that seemed to wrap around them, making the confined hallway feel even more intimate. Each glance, each smile, each brush of a hand built a quiet rhythm, a language of connection without words. By the end of the encounter, he realized that these small, careful gestures, the blanket, the shared laughter, the fleeting touches, had done more than fill an idle moment. They had created trust, warmth, and a sense of mutual understanding that lingered in the quiet air. The hallway, once mundane, had become a space alive with subtle affection, unspoken emotion, and the delicate beginnings of something more profound. The night, he understood, had shifted imperceptibly yet irrevocably. The bond forming between them was real, tangible, and quietly undeniable. The hallway had grown quieter, the usual office hum fading into near silence. Their conversation had shifted from casual topics and polite laughter to something more profound, a delicate unveiling of self. She, 40 years old, black hair falling in gentle waves over her shoulders, dressed in a cream blouse and dark trousers, stood just slightly closer than before, her posture relaxed yet purposeful, carrying a blend of confidence and vulnerability that made the space between them feel electric. "I don't usually share this," she began softly, her voice low and intimate, almost a whisper in the still hallway. Her eyes held his, dark and steady, as though measuring whether he could truly understand. Her hand brushed along the folder she carried, fingers lingering a moment, betraying a faint nervousness beneath her composed exterior. The simple gesture sent a quiet jolt through him, an awareness that this moment, seemingly ordinary, was layered with significance. He listened carefully, attentive not just to her words but to the subtle cues of her body language. The soft exhale as she paused, the delicate tilt of her head, the tiny shift in weight from one foot to the other, all spoke volumes. His own chest tightened in response, a mixture of empathy, curiosity, and an unexpected flutter that made him keenly aware of her presence. The warmth radiating from her was tangible, a comforting yet thrilling reminder of the connection that had slowly formed between them. She continued, revealing a personal challenge, a fleeting moment of self-doubt at work, a quiet fear that rarely saw daylight. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the brief falter in her smile, the vulnerability she usually kept tucked behind composure. He responded without hesitation, voice gentle yet firm. "It's okay to feel that way. I understand. You're not alone in it." The sincerity in his words seemed to reach her instantly. Her eyes softened, the intensity giving way to a quiet gratitude. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway seemed to breathe with them, the warm overhead lights casting soft reflections on the polished floor. A subtle silence carried intimacy. The faint scent of her perfume, light floral notes, mingled with the crisp air, enhancing the sense of closeness. He noticed the small, deliberate movements she made, adjusting the folder, brushing a strand of hair back, subtly leaning closer while still respecting the unspoken boundaries. Each action was a punctuation in their shared rhythm, a tactile acknowledgement of trust and growing connection. A fleeting touch occurred, his hand briefly brushing hers as he reached for the folder, and neither pulled away. The contact was unassuming, yet it resonated, embedding itself in their awareness. It spoke louder than words: empathy, recognition, and the silent spark of something more. In that quiet, electric moment, the hallway transformed. It was no longer just a transitional space, it had become a realm of understanding, care, and emotional intimacy. By the time their conversation drew to a natural pause, a profound sense of connection lingered. He realized that this encounter, born of chance, had shifted something within both of them. Vulnerability had opened doors, and the unspoken bond now stretched taut between them, a delicate tension, rich with promise, curiosity, and quiet desire. The slow, deliberate build of trust and emotion had reached its emotional peak, leaving both acutely aware of the possibilities that awaited beyond the threshold of that hallway. The hallway, once just a transitional space, now felt alive with the quiet resonance of what had passed between them. Every glance, every subtle movement, every carefully chosen word had layered warmth and intimacy onto the moment. She, 40 years old, black hair softly falling over her shoulders, dressed in a cream blouse and dark trousers, stood with a calm confidence tempered by vulnerability, the very air around her carrying the gravity of connection. Her eyes met his, steady and reflective, as though reading his thoughts while silently sharing her own. They lingered, either rushing to break the moment. The faint hum of the office air conditioning and the distant clatter of keyboards had faded, leaving the soft warmth of the hallway lights and the echo of their quiet conversation. His chest was tight, but not uncomfortably so, a steady, pulsing reminder of the bond that had slowly formed. She adjusted her posture slightly, shoulders relaxed, but there was a subtle lean toward him, just enough to hint at the comfort she felt in his presence. "I'm glad we talked," she said softly, voice gentle and sincere, carrying both gratitude and a hint of wistfulness. He nodded, words unnecessary, because the shared silence between them now spoke louder than any sentence could. The brief brush of her hand against the folder she had carried, her fingers subtly lingering, sent another quiet thrill through him. The warmth of her proximity, the faint scent of her perfume, and the soft light all contributed to the lingering intimacy that made the hallway feel like a private world carved out just for them. As he prepared to step past her, their movements synchronized almost instinctively, shoulders brushing slightly as if drawn by the unspoken gravity between them. She gave a small, encouraging smile, one that radiated both reassurance and curiosity, the kind that invites further discovery without forcing it. He felt the faint, steady warmth of her presence, the lingering rhythm of shared heartbeats in the brief space between gestures. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, yet profoundly affecting for both of them. A final, fleeting gesture, a hand brushing against his arm as she adjusted the folder, a small nod, a soft exhale, created a sense of completion without breaking the tender tension that had woven through the evening. It was a promise unspoken, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection they had discovered in the unlikeliest of places. Their eyes met one last time, lingering, holding, acknowledging the shared experience that had transformed what could have been a mundane hallway encounter into something extraordinary. When she stepped back to leave, the subtle warmth of her smile and the gentle weight of her gaze remained, a tangible echo in the space he now occupied alone. The hallway felt different, fuller, warmer, alive with the memory of conversation, laughter, and fleeting touches. He realized with a quiet thrill that the connection they had forged was real, meaningful, and deliberately tender, a slow-burning ember that promised more in the days to come. The encounter had ended, yet its resonance lingered, a delicate warmth that would accompany him beyond the hallway, beyond the office, and into the quiet anticipation of what might unfold. The night had closed, but the story of connection, understanding, and subtle affection remained, leaving him aware of the extraordinary possibilities hidden in ordinary moments.